Welcome, restless souls, to Carman's Crypt. I'm Carman, keeper of forgotten tales and curator of nightmares. You've wandered into my domain, where each week I unearth a fresh horror from the depths of human imagination. In these darkened halls, stories wait like hungry shadows. Each tale we've collected whispers of terrors both ancient and new. From crumbling mansions where something skitters behind the walls, to that strange text message you received at 3 a.m. from a number that shouldn't exist. So gather close. The candles are lit, the shadows grow long, and the witching hour is upon us. Are you prepared to face what lurks in the darkest recesses of Carman's Crypt? Lock your doors, still your nerves, and remember, here, every fear comes alive. This is Carman's Crypt. Your sanctuary of scares awaits. I should have known better. I really should have. But the price was too good to pass up. And in this cutthroat housing market, beggars can't be choosers. So I ignored the red flags, silenced the whispers of unease in my mind, and bought the house anyway. It was a grand old Victorian, looming at the end of a shadow-draped cul-de-sac in what was once a thriving suburban neighborhood. Now, the surrounding houses stood empty, their windows dark and accusing. Even before I moved in, I noticed how the local wildlife seemed to avoid the property. No birds nested in the gnarled oak trees that flanked the house. No squirrels darted across the overgrown lawn. The silence was absolute, as if nature itself knew to keep its distance. 3 bedrooms, 2 baths with original hardwood floors that creaked with every step, and a wraparound porch that groaned in the wind. The realtor, a gaunt woman with 2 wide eyes, kept gushing about its character and old-world charm. Looking back, I remember how her hands trembled as she unlocked the front door, how she refused to enter certain rooms alone. She never stayed past sunset, always making hurried excuses to leave before darkness fell. In hindsight, I should have asked why such a beautiful home was priced so far below market value, but I was too caught up in the excitement of finally owning my own place to question it. The previous owners had left in such a hurry they abandoned furniture, artwork, even family photos. I found them in a box in the basement, smiling faces that grew progressively more haunted in each successive image, until they stopped appearing altogether. The first night in my new home, I was jolted awake by a sound that sent an icy chill through my veins. A faint scratching, yes, but underlying it was something else. A whimper, barely audible, like a wounded animal, or a person in pain. It seemed to come from the walls and the floors, filling the darkness with its desperate plea. That first night, I also noticed the mirrors. Every reflection seemed slightly wrong, movements that didn't quite sync up, shadows that lingered a moment too long. I told myself it was just the house settling, maybe squirrels in the attic. Old houses make noises, right? Nothing to worry about. I repeated this mantra as I pulled the covers over my head, trying to drown out the sound. But sleep eluded me, and the scratching continued, growing louder and more insistent with each passing hour. Sometimes, in the depths of night, I could swear I heard footsteps in the hallway, slow, dragging steps that paused outside my bedroom door. Night after night, the noises tormented me. There was a deliberate, rhythmic quality to them now. Scratch, scratch, scratch. A muffled sob. Scratch, scratch, scratch. Sometimes it would go on for hours, building to a frenzy before abruptly cutting off, leaving me in suffocating silence. The house seemed to be changing too. Rooms felt larger at night. Hallways stretched longer than they should. More than once, I found doors open that I distinctly remembered closing, or closed when I'd left them open. The neighbors, what few remained, avoided me. Once I tried asking the elderly woman next door about the house's history. She crossed herself and hurried inside, slamming her door. But through her window, I saw her watching me, her face a mask of pity and fear. After a week of disrupted sleep, I'd reached my breaking point. Wild-eyed and trembling from exhaustion, I dragged the stepladder out of the garage and climbed up to investigate the attic. The small door was stuck, warped with age, but I managed to wrench it open with a screech that echoed through the empty house. As it swung wide, a wave of stale, cold air washed over me, carrying the metallic tang of old blood. I poked my head up into the musty space, shining my flashlight into the oppressive gloom. Cobwebs draped every surface like funeral shrouds, and a thick layer of dust coated the floorboards, unmarred by footprints or animal tracks. There were a few old trunks and boxes scattered about, left behind by previous owners who had fled in the night, but no sign of any obvious source of the maddening scratches. The beam of my flashlight caught something odd, symbols carved into the support beams, crude and strange. They seemed to pulse with a faint, sickly light when I looked directly at them. I was about to give up when my light fell on something that made my blood run cold. In the far corner, partially hidden behind a stack of moldering boxes, was a second small door set into the wall. It looked ancient, its weathered wood almost black with age. An ornate brass lock hung from a rusty hasp, covered in more strange symbols that I didn't recognize. The air around it seemed to shimmer, like heat waves rising from hot pavement, and I could feel a deep vibration emanating from behind it, more felt than heard. My legs moved of their own accord, drawing me closer despite every instinct screaming at me to run. I picked my way carefully across the attic, avoiding the spots where the floorboards looked especially rotten. Each step closer to the door made my head spin, my vision blurring at the edges. The temperature dropped steadily until I could see my breath hanging in clouds before me. When I reached the door, I hesitated, my hand hovering inches from its surface. Something about it felt wrong, unnatural, but I had to know what was on the other side. The brass handle was ice cold to the touch, and I swore I felt it pulse beneath my fingers like a beating heart. I rattled the handle, but of course it was locked. The brass lock was corroded shut. No way I was opening it without bolt cutters. I pressed my ear to the rough wood, holding my breath and listening intently. For a long moment, there was only silence. Then I heard it, a faint scratching from the other side of the door, followed by a whisper so quiet I almost missed it. "Help me." The voice was female, young, filled with a desperation that made my soul ache. I jerked back, heart pounding. What the hell was in there? My mind conjured images of rats, raccoons, all manner of vermin. But deep down, I knew it was something far worse. As I backed away, my flashlight beam caught more symbols carved around the doorframe, the same ones from the beams. But these were carved deeper, more deliberately. They seemed to move in the light, twisting into patterns that hurt my eyes to look at. I scrambled back across the attic and down the ladder, slamming the access door shut behind me. Sleep was impossible after that. I spent the rest of the night researching the history of the house, desperate for some explanation. The local library's historical archives held newspapers dating back to the house's construction, their yellowed pages crumbling at my touch. What I found chilled me to the bone. The house had been built in 1897 by a reclusive widower named Josiah Blackstone. Local legends painted him as a practitioner of dark arts, a man who dabbled in forces beyond mortal comprehension. He lived there alone for years, a hermit feared by all. Then, in 1912, he remarried, a pretty young woman named Charlotte, barely out of her teens. But their wedded bliss was short-lived. The newspapers painted a disturbing picture of Josiah's first wife's death, officially ruled a suicide. but the details were strange. Her body was found in the attic, surrounded by bizarre symbols drawn in what happened to be her own blood. The coroner's report noted that her fingernails were worn down to bloody stumps, as if she had spent hours scratching at something. Just 6 months after the wedding to Charlotte, she disappeared without a trace. Josiah claimed she had run off with another man, but the townspeople whispered darker theories. There was talk of screams in the night, of Charlotte begging for help in the weeks before she vanished, of strange rituals and sacrifices to unnamed entities. But no concrete evidence was ever found, and eventually the case went cold. Josiah died a few years later, his body discovered at the foot of the attic stairs, his face frozen in a mask of terror. The house passed through a succession of owners over the decades, but no one seemed to stay for long. There were vague stories of strange noises, of a bad atmosphere, of children who spoke of a sad lady in the walls, begging to be set free. I didn't sleep at all that night, or the next. The scratching continued, louder than ever. Sometimes I thought I could hear a woman's voice mixed in with the sound, whimpering and pleading. But whenever I really focused, trying to make out words, it faded back into meaningless noise. I knew I should leave. Everything in me was screaming to get out of that house and never look back. But I'd sunk every penny I had into the down payment. I couldn't afford to just walk away. So I stayed, growing more exhausted and on edge with each passing day. I took to sleeping on the couch downstairs, as far from the attic as possible. But distance didn't help. The scratching followed me, seeming to come from everywhere. I started hearing it during the day too, not just at night. And worse, I began to see things out of the corner of my eye. A flash of pale skin, a swish of tattered cloth, gone when I turned to look. A week after discovering the locked door, I hit my breaking point. Driven half mad by sleep deprivation and fear, I went to the hardware store and bought a set of bolt cutters. I was going to open that damn door if it was the last thing I did. That night, I climbed back up into the attic, armed with my flashlight and bolt cutters. The scratching was frantic now, a constant scrabbling, punctuated by muffled thumps and what sounded horribly like sobs. My hands shook as I approached the door, but I stilled myself. I had to know. The lock put up more resistance than I expected. I strained against the bolt cutters, muscles trembling with the effort. Just as I thought the metal would never give, there was a sudden snap, and the lock fell away. As it hit the floor, a well of anguish and triumph filled the air. It was unlike any sound I had ever heard, causing goosebumps to spread across my skin. For a long moment I stood frozen, staring at the now unlocked door. The scratching had stopped. The silence felt oppressive, expectant. Slowly, I reached out and grasped the handle. Taking a deep breath, I pulled the door open. The smell hit me first, a wave of decay and rot that nearly made me gag. I coughed, eyes watering, and raised my flashlight. The beam fell on a small, windowless room, empty except for a single object in the center. It was a rocking chair, facing away from me, and there was someone sitting in it. I knew I should run. Every instinct was shrieking at me to flee. But I was rooted to the spot, unable to look away. Slowly, so slowly, the chair began to rock, creaking, back and forth, back and forth. A hand appeared over the top of the chair back, skeletal fingers tipped with long, ragged nails. The hand grasped the wood, knuckles white with strain. Then slowly, jerkily, a head rose into view. Matted hair hung in clumps around a withered face, skin stretched tight over bones, gray and desiccated. And the eyes. God, the eyes. Sunken and shriveled, but somehow still aware. still full of pain and fury and madness. The head swiveled towards me with a sickening crack of ancient bones. The mouth opened, revealing blackened stumps of teeth. And it spoke, in a voice like dusty leaves scraping over stone. "You open the door." The figure began to rise, bones creaking and popping as it unfolded itself from the chair. It was impossibly tall, limbs too long and joints bent at unnatural angles. As it turned to face me fully, I saw that its chest was caved in, ribs splintered and jutting through papery skin. "He locked me away," it rasped, taking a jerky step forward. "Said the ritual needed sacrifice, but I wouldn't die. Couldn't die." I stumbled backward, fumbling for the door handle behind me, but it was gone. The door had vanished, leaving only smooth, featureless wall. The creature, Charlotte, I realized with dawning horror, lurched towards me, arms outstretched. "So hungry," it moaned. "Been so long." I screamed then, a sound of pure terror that tore through my throat. I threw myself at the wall where the door had been, clawing frantically at the wooden panels. Behind me, I heard the wet snap of joints popping as the thing moved closer. "Thank you for freeing me," Charlotte whispered, her breath cold against the back of my neck. "Now, you take my place." Skeletal hands grabbed me, nails digging into my flesh. I was spun around, forced to stare into those terrible, ancient eyes. They began to glow with an unholy light, and I felt my very soul being torn from my body. The last thing I remember is being shoved into that tiny room, the door slamming shut behind me. I've been here ever since, scratching at the walls, begging to be freed. Time has no meaning here. I don't know how long it's been. Days, years, centuries. But I know that someday someone else will buy this house. Someone else will hear the scratching, will be driven by curiosity to open the door. And when they do, I'll be waiting. So, if you're house hunting and you find a place that seems too good to be true, walk away. Some doors are meant to stay locked. Some secrets are meant to stay buried. And some houses are never truly empty. Because now, I am the one who scratches. I am the one who waits. And I am so very, very hungry. And so, dear listeners, we emerge from another dark corner of Carman's crypt. But remember, the horrors you've heard tonight are merely echoes of the terrors that await in the shadows of your own mind. If you enjoyed your stay in the crypt, why not invite a friend to join us next week? After all, fear is best when shared. Leave a review if you dare, or share your own tales of terror on my social media. Who knows, your nightmares might just become my next story. Until next time, keep checking under your bed, and remember, in Carman's crypt, every fear comes alive, and no one is truly safe. Sweet dreams, if you can still sleep at all.